A really huge portion of these study tips you'll get from professors and other people who want you to be better in school, and maybe that you'll find here on YouTube, are really basic. They'll tell you to sit up front in class, scan your textbooks instead of reading every single chapter, bring your cat to class to reduce stress, and so you get to meet the nice folks at animal control. And these tips, while they're good, they're really, really useful, they are basic. And maybe you're like me. You're a classical, detail-driven nerd. Like when I play fighting games, I want to learn all the frame data and every single moveset and all the matchups instead of just playing the game and having fun, quote unquote. So applying to study, I'm the same way, and I want to find really advanced tips, ways to sort of hack my learning, things that usually don't come up when you get your basic study tips. So to that end, maybe you're like me and want to get some advanced study tips, and I am happy to oblige. And in this video, I'm going to give you 8 of those advanced study tips. So let's get started. So the first tip is to use the Corson technique when asking professors for help. Now, Dale Corson was the 8th president of Cornell University. Yes, the same Cornell University that spawned the famous Cornell note-taking system. And he was also a chemistry professor, and he said that students in chemistry and other science and math programs often have to really work to crack problems one sentence at a time as they go through their textbooks or problem sets. But sometimes eventually you get to a point where you just can't crack the problem on your own and you need to ask for help, right? So you go to your professor, and what Dale Corson wants you to think about before you actually talk to your professor is pause and ask yourself, what is it that I don't understand? Like, truly, what is it that I don't understand? And what he wants you to get away from is this thing that a lot of students do where they go to their professor and with a general wave of the hand, as he says, they say, I don't understand what I'm looking at. Like, this is just confusing to me. I don't get it. And what he wants you to do is avoid that. Rather, pick apart the problem one sentence at a time and figure out the exact point at which you don't get what's going on. So right here, I understand this process makes sense to me, but here is where I'm getting a little shaky and I just don't get this. After that, I'm cool. When you can pinpoint that, you're going to impress your professor with your preparation and the amount of effort you put into the problem. So you get some brownie points there, but you're also working to practice the art of recognizing confusion and following it down to its actual source. And this will help you immensely in all of your learning going forward. Tip number 2 is to learn facts quickly with a technique called spaced repetition. Now, spaced repetition is the art of studying things at increasingly bigger and bigger intervals of time. And it's a very efficient way to study, but it's also, it takes advantage of the way your brain works. And basically, spaced repetition is a system where you'll study something, and if you know that individual fact very well, you will not see it for quite a while. But the facts that you don't know well, you're going to see them more and more frequently. And the way that this works on a brain level is that you are trying to recall information. You're forcing your brain to pull it out at the closest time possible to when you are about to forget it. So your brain actually has to work as hard as it possibly can to recall this information, and it encodes it better. So it's more efficient and you can actually learn a lot faster. Now, the best way to take advantage of this is to use an SRS or spaced repetition software to do your studying for you instead of using index cards or something. Now, when I was studying Japanese, and I will be doing this again soon, I used one called WaniKani that was very, very efficient and helped me learn hundreds of kanji and Japanese vocab words. But there is actually a free and generalized one called Anki, and you can find it at ankisrs.net, where you can actually create your own card sets for any type of data that you think you would want to study with SRS. Or you can actually find shared card decks from people who have already made things. So definitely check that out. I think the preparation aspect of making your own card decks is very useful, but simply going through and studying them using spaced repetition is usually going to be more efficient than using just typical linear flashcard study methods on paper. All right, tip number 3, and we're getting a little bit more advanced here. So this one is to try out the method of Loki for memorization. Now, the method of Loki goes back to the Greek and Roman times, and it is a memorization technique that has been used by memory champs for a long time. And it essentially takes advantage of your brain's ability to remember spatial information very well. It's all about visualization. And the classic way to do it is to associate certain sets of the set of data you're trying to memorize, certain groups of that with different rooms of a house. So let me give you an example. This is the kanji for king in Japanese. And the pronunciation, the way that you say king in Japanese is O. And O is kind of a It's really simple pronunciation. It doesn't really lend itself too well to mnemonics, which is a shame because mnemonics is a great way to learn kanji. Now, what if I wanted to adapt the method of Loki to learning this kanji along with lots of others? What does a king sit on? A throne, or as we could say, the toilet. And I am not averse to using 5-year-old humor here. And what do you say when you smell the toilet? Oh, yeah. Work with me here. Also, the kanji for king kind of looks like a towel rack, so I could associate king with the bathroom in a house. And if I really wanted to make this study technique useful for me, I would go into the bathroom and I would put up flashcards on the walls, and then I'd walk through my house and study this. Now, the method of Loki is kind of difficult, or Loki is kind of difficult to use. It's sort of an advanced technique, and usually you're going to be better off with SRS or mnemonics if you have a smaller set of data. But if you've got a lot to work with and nothing else has worked for you, it's something that you can try. Tip number 4 is to hack acrasia. So acrasia is a term that has been written about for centuries, and it goes back to Plato, and it's essentially a lack of command over oneself. And there's another even more complex term called picoeconomics, which talks about this hyperbolic discounting that we do. Essentially, we discount the value of a task the more it is delayed, the more the reward is pushed off into the future, which in short, means that we tend to procrastinate and do sort of fun things that don't really align with our values in the short term, and we avoid doing things that really do line up with our values because the reward is delayed. So the way you can hack acrasia, or sort of avoid becoming a victim to it, is twofold. One, use a commitment device. Bind yourself to getting your task done on time. And the way I do this is by using an app called Beeminder, which I've talked about before. I absolutely love Beeminder, and I've been using it to ensure that I publish 3 things a week for quite a while now. And if you look at my graph here, which I'll throw up, you can see that I have actually been publishing much more frequently than I was before. And it's largely because I use a commitment device to bind myself to do this. Now, another way that you can sort of hack acrasia, the second part of the fold, is to add a shorter term reward to completing a task. In the classic way, you've probably seen this image before, is to put gummy bears on your textbook, and as you read paragraphs, you allow yourself to eat them. But you can do all sorts of other things. Let yourself watch an episode of Game of Thrones once you finish an assignment, or maybe use a tool like Habit RPG and give yourself some experience and gold when you finish the study problem set or something. Just find a way to make sure that the only reward isn't that far off delayed one that causes acrasia. All right, tip number 5 is to improve the Pomodoro technique. And you may have heard of the Pomodoro technique. Everyone talks about it, but in case you haven't, it's simply a technique where you set a timer for about 25 minutes, classically, and then you work only on one task during that 25-minute session. And I think a lot of people do this, and it's very useful, but there are some areas for improvement that I don't think a lot of people take advantage of. So let me just rapid fire give them to you. So number 1, and I've talked about how much I'm a fan of the Beeminder app. The Beeminder blog is also a good resource for productivity techniques and experiments. And one of the things that they talk about is this thing they do called talks. Well, a talk is essentially a Pomodoro session, except where they use about 45 minutes and then take 15-minute breaks instead of the classic 25-minute, 5-minute break structure. So the tip here is to experiment with the time intervals. Don't just set yourself to 25 minutes and assume that that's the only potential interval that you could study at. Find what works for you. And the other one is to put a piece of paper next to you during your Pomodoro session, and whenever anything comes up that distracts you, maybe a phone call or the urge to check Facebook or something, write it down. Now, this lets you do 2 things. 1, you can remember what the distraction was, and if it happened to be something urgent, you can take care of it during your break time. But 2, as you continue to do lots of Pomodoro sessions over months and months, you start to see what are the common problem points, what comes up a lot that distracts you, and then you can take steps to prevent these things. So maybe if it's your phone, you forget to put it in do not disturb mode. Well, you can do that now. If it's a certain website that you really want to visit because it's just so distracting and draws you in, then you can use an extension like Stay Focused on Chrome to block it during your study sessions. Very useful stuff. Tip number 6 is when learning new concepts, use both focused and diffused thinking. Now, this is a concept that I learned about in a book called Thinking in Numbers. And look at this guy, Magnus Carlsen. He is currently the #1 chess player in the world, but back in 2004, when he was just 13 years old, he played Garry Kasparov, who was considered the best chess player in the world a couple of decades ago, and who is often considered to be the best chess player of all time. He played Gary to a draw. And look at what he does from these screenshots here. During the match, he actually gets up and walks around, looks at other tables. And what he's doing, what the author of this book has pointed out, is he's using diffuse thinking. So focused thinking really takes advantage of your prefrontal cortex to focus on one specific set of data, one specific problem, and it really concentrates on that one thing. But it sort of doesn't let the rest of your brain become activated, and a lot of ideas come from different nodes of your brain connecting different completely unrelated ideas in new different ways, and that's the diffuse mode of thinking. So when you're learning something new, you want to use diffuse thinking so you can sort of grok it. You can sort of tie it to other nodes in your brain and understand it. If you only try to focus on the problem and do nothing else, you're going to have a lot harder time solving the problem. Now, focused thinking is very, very good for problems you already understand, for processes that you've gone through before. And that's why you want to use these two modes of thinking in combination. Now, tip number 7, and I've talked about this before in terms of textbooks, is to gauge your classes. And the specific area I want you to think about here is gauge the speed at which your professor moves and at which you're able to understand. So if your professor tends to go too fast and you can't really understand everything he's presenting, maybe he writes too fast and you can't take notes fast enough, or he just moves through the material too fast for you to really understand it and give it time to process in your brain, then you want to take some steps to mitigate that problem. And one thing you could do is read through the chapter before a lecture. Maybe if you have some material that outlines what's going to be in the lecture, you can sort of use that to look at the most relevant parts of the textbook and sort of prime your brain for the lecture. One other thing you can do if the class pace is just too fast, and I can't really emphasize this enough, is to simply ask your professor for help or ask questions in the middle of class. The professors are there to help you, and you should take advantage of that. And my 8th and final tip is to start your problem sets alone. So when I was a sophomore, I had a statistics class, and I actually had a partner, and she would come over to my dorm basically every time we had a homework assignment to do, and we would do it together. And I now realize that this isn't really the best strategy. Now, I got a pretty good grade in the class anyway, but going forward, I wouldn't do this again. And here's the reason why. When you do a problem set with a partner, you're kind of robbing yourself the opportunity to really pinpoint gaps in your understanding, because two people going at the same problem at the same time, if one person is able to do the entire thing, then the other person can sort of kind of get where the first person's coming from. So if you don't really understand a problem, or maybe there's one tiny little section that you wouldn't have gotten, but your partner does, you're going to latch onto their answer. You're going to say, yeah, I sort of get that, and you're going to move on. But if you do it alone, then you're going to be able to pinpoint those areas of confusion and shore them up before you get into a group and finish the assignment. So start them alone. So those are my 8 advanced study tips. And I know this video is a bit longer than normal, but if you've got any questions about these and want to learn more about any specific ones, then be sure to leave a comment below and let me know. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching my video on advanced study tips. Now, if you want to get more study tips every single week and other tips on being an awesome college student, then hit that big red subscribe button right there and you'll get those videos every single Thursday. Also, if you want to find the companion blog post where I link to any resources for research I did or other things I mentioned in the video, you can click the orange button right there to find that. If you missed my last video, there's a clip of it playing right there. And also, if you want to get better grades, I wrote a 100+ page book called 10 Steps to Earning Awesome Grades While Studying Less, and I want to give it to you for free. So if you want to get that book, just click the picture of the book right there. Lastly, if you want to connect with me or ask questions or submit new ideas for new videos, you can either follow me on Twitter at TomFrankly or simply leave a comment in the video below here, and I will respond to you no matter what.